Hi, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. So, in this episode, we have journalist and Savannah tour guide Enocha Edenfield. In this episode, she shares her journey and spills all of the spooky deets on one of the most haunted towns in America, Savannah. Originally from Florida, Enocha moved to Savannah in 2010, and her interest in the paranormal drastically grew when she realized how many places in the city were, in fact, haunted. During the 2020 lockdown, she started sharing some of Savannah's ghost stories on TikTok and soon after began giving tours throughout the city. Now, with nearly 100,000 followers, she gives private history based ghost tours to people wanting to experience some of the city's haunts for themselves. Along with some creepy personal experiences, Enocha discusses some of the most haunted spots in the city. We chat about everything from ghost attachments to haunted apartment buildings, hotels, cemeteries, and even a news station. Halloween is year round in Savannah. I was actually fortunate enough to go to Savannah last month on a family vacation, and one of our mutual friends, Tammy from Holly Weird Paranormal, connected us, and I went on one of her tours. It was awesome. And if you're going to be in Savannah, I highly, highly recommend booking one of her tours. I listed all of her contact information in the show notes below. Well, welcome, Enocha. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thank you.
So, I like to start out with every episode with the guest sharing a little bit about your journey and your background, and where did your interest in the paranormal originally begin?
I was always kind of interested in the paranormal. I grew up in a very religious household, which I feel like that's a very similar story for a lot of us. Um, and it was an evangelical household. I was raised in the South during the Satanic Panic, so there wasn't a whole lot of room to really explore all of that growing up. So when I graduated from high school and moved off to college, I decided to start looking into some of that. I moved to Pensacola, Florida, which is a very haunted city. Did a little bit of research, was kind of dipping my toe into things. And then later on, after I graduated, I was working for a magazine based out of Port St. Joe, Florida, which is this really small town. And we were working on the Halloween edition of the magazine, and I contacted a paranormal investigation group and asked if I could tag along on an investigation. And they let me, and heard a few things, had some experiences on that. And then later on, when I moved to Savannah, Georgia, everything just kind of got turned up to 11. My first apartment was haunted. I moved here to work at the NBC affiliate here in town. That station was haunted. And it's just kind of grown from there.
That's so cool. And I don't know too many ghost stories about Florida, but do you have any encounters, or was there any like inkling, I guess, early on, even in your childhood or when you moved to Pensacola, that you had any interest in this, or it just kind of felt like over time you were more drawn into it?
I would say that I was always sensitive to some degree. But as a kid, growing up in a very religious household, you're told that, you're not, the things that you're feeling aren't valid. So I wasn't really able to explore that until I moved away.
Interesting. So what started happening when you moved to Savannah?
So I moved to Savannah. I moved into an apartment that was an old Victorian home that had been split into 3 different apartments. The first floor was one apartment, the second floor was 2. And I had one of the upstairs apartments. And as I was moving in, my neighbor across the hall, his name was Sam, he came over and introduced himself. And as we were talking, he asked, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And I'm thinking, that is a very weird warm-up question, but sure. And he said, "Good, my apartment's haunted. He might come over to yours. Normally he just stays in mine. I just wanted to give you a heads up in case you had any experiences." And I was like, all right, person I don't know. Thank you for the heads up. And the entire time he lived there, nothing happened. But he moved out about a year after that. And anytime that apartment was vacant, stuff would happen in my apartment. And my cats, I had 2 cats at the time, would stop and look at very specific points, especially the door to our shared hallway that the 2 apartments had. And by this point, I had totally forgotten what the ghost's name was, even though Sam had told me. So I just called him Bob. And anytime something happened, I'd say, "Hey, Bob, how's it going?" And just go about my business.
Well, that's crazy. So actually, I have a couple interesting points off that I wanted to ask you. It is really creepy when you see an animal staring at something, and it's almost like they're looking at a corner, or there's clearly nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
Were you kind of a little bit creeped out, or did you kind of think that that's what it was, that it would be the ghost, Bob?
I wasn't really creeped out about it. Sam and his ghost roommate had always gotten along, so I didn't feel like he was a threatening spirit at all. So I just thought that maybe he was bored because he was stuck in an apartment that didn't have anybody in it at the time.
Yeah, and that's also what I was going to say. Is it's interesting that it kind of the energy amped up after he left when it was vacant, like there was no one there.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this is just kind of a random question. I'm curious to what you would think about this. If like an apartment building is haunted, like let's say there was one particular room like where you were, do you think the whole building itself could be haunted, or do you think sometimes it's just like a particular unit, or it's like a case by case scenario?
I think it's a case by case thing. I think it depends on the spirit and why they are haunting that particular location. Maybe they feel like one particular room or one particular apartment is theirs and then the rest of the building is other people's. Or maybe they are attached to the entire building. In this case, the building started off as a private residence before it was switched into apartments. So who knows?
Yeah, and even thinking about like if the land is haunted or something like that, then it really kind of would take over the whole building, the whole domain, I guess.
Yeah.
So what happened after you continued living there? Was there any more activity?
Every once in a while, somebody would move into that apartment. After Sam moved out, there was a woman who moved in. She didn't stay for too terribly long. I don't think it had anything to do with the ghost. I think it was just stuff going on in her personal life. So after she moved out, activity popped off again. Again, it was just him wandering in every once in a while and the cat staring at the door to the shared hallway. And then a very nice couple moved in, and they were there when I ended up moving out. While they were there, I never had anything happen.
Interesting. Did you ever talk to any of the neighbors about it, or you kind of just kept it to yourself?
I kept it to myself because I remembered how awkward that conversation was with Sam when I moved in, and I did not want to have that conversation with anybody else.
Especially because I feel like when moving in, you're stressed out enough, and probably once you finally found a place and you want to get settled, then you find out that it's haunted, and not everyone's into that. So yeah, I could see how that could be kind of alarming.
Especially if you got some strange woman across the hallway who you've never met going, "Oh, by the way, your apartment's haunted."
That just adds another whole layer of complexity for sure. So after you moved out of there, right? Or you're still there?
Mhm.
Was the
I moved out of there to briefly move to Houston with my husband, and then we moved back after a year and a half because Houston is a lovely city, but it is not my vibe.
any ghost stories from Houston while you were there?
No, Houston, my entire time in Houston is just kind of a blur of activity.
Okay, so we'll transition, I guess, to when you come back to Savannah. And is that when you began working at the news station?
I was working at the news station before, so I moved here in 2010 to work at the NBC affiliate here in town, and then moved away briefly, moved back, and was able to get my old job back at the station. And the entire time I worked there, I worked the overnight shift. My shift usually would be from midnight to about 8 or 9 in the morning. And when I first started working there, I was the only person there until about 4 in the morning, which is when the editor would show up. And the entire time I worked there, slowly our crew grew, and we got more and more people who would work more hours, so I wasn't there by myself. But when I first started working there, I would hear footsteps and voices in other parts of the building. And it's a TV station. I just told myself, oh, that's just somebody's TV that they left on. We have TVs all over the place, and somebody probably just left the volume up a little bit, and that's what I'm hearing. But as our crew expanded and we got more people, other people would start to hear voices and footsteps. And it became a joke. Oh, that's just the station ghost. One time they were doing some work on the production booth, which is where I would sit during the newscast, and they had moved us upstairs to the second floor. And there was a doorway that led down into the lobby. And as we were sitting up there during the show, it was me, my director, and our computer graphics operator who were sitting up there. And the computer graphics operator, during the commercial break, asked us if there was anyone else in the building. And we said, no, it's us and the anchors that you can see on TV. And he said, I keep hearing footsteps coming from the lobby. And I kind of laughed because that was my first clue that somebody else was hearing it too. I was like, yep, that's just our station ghost. And it got to the point where a co-producer I had refused to go to the women's restroom in the lobby because she kept hearing things and she didn't want to go down there by herself. So one of us would have to go with her. And eventually that culminated in the ghost running in front of one of our cameras.
Oh, no, wait, did you capture anything?
So, okay, this is a wild ride of a story. So by this point, they had moved our production booth back downstairs. We're in the middle of the 6 a.m. newscast. It's a commercial break. So my director is going through our video files to make sure that everything has sent correctly, that none of the files are corrupted so they won't glitch during the next block of news. I am looking at the cameras because they are all coded with computers now. We don't have camera operators. And I'm making sure that all of them are pointing where they're supposed to be pointing for the next block. As my director and I are both working on our things, I see somebody run in front of one of the cameras. And I get on my headset to talk to my prompter operator who's sitting in the studio. And I said, Mike, did anybody else walk into the studio? And he said, no, it is me and the anchors. That's it. And I knew that it wasn't Mike because his headset was hardwired to where he was sitting, so he can't move around and talk to me at the same time. I turn around to look at my director to ask if he saw what I just saw, and he is staring straight ahead at that monitor. His eyes are huge, and he just nods yes. And I'm like, awesome, we both just saw that. And I asked him, were we recording by any chance? And he said, no, because we're in a commercial break and that camera isn't live. And I said, dang it.
Oh no. Because it's almost more, so much more confirming when someone else has the same experience.
Mm-hmm.
Did you just see it? Was it like a shadow figure or something out of the corner of your eye? Or how did it appear to you?
It was a brown flash in front of one of the cameras. And that's what it looks like when, if you've ever been in a news studio, you've got the anchors on the desk, and there's a camera that's a good distance away from them. And if you don't realize that a camera is live, sometimes you accidentally walk in front of a camera. And if you're standing very close to it, it just looks like a flash of color. And that's what that looked like. It looked like somebody was walking right in front of the camera and didn't realize that it was live.
Oh, wow. Do you have any idea of who it could be, or were there any like deaths in the studio or anything like that?
So I researched all sorts of things. I was trying to figure out if someone had died in the building. That building was built in the 60s, but that area before the station was built was a part of something called all right, hold on. I got the name of it. It's in my head. The Great Savannah Races. It has another name, but I can't remember the other name right now. And it was the Grand Prix. It was a Grand Prix race. Sorry.
Oh, interesting.
It was a race that took place in Savannah in 1908, 1910, and 1911. And it started and ended about where the station is today. And this was during a time where the roads weren't the greatest and cars did not have any safety features. So there were some deadly crashes during that race. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is tied to that. Maybe it's tied to another accident. And I researched so much in that area, could not find anything. Finally, I was like, let me just talk to somebody who's worked at the station for a while. News stations are notorious for having high turnover, just because it's one of those industries where people are always looking for like the next biggest, better job.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one guy who had worked in engineering for decades, and I messaged him and I said, hey, this is stuff that me and my coworkers have been experiencing. Do you have any idea who this could be? And he said, oh, I know exactly who that is. I'm like, you do? He said that it was an engineer who had worked at the building also for decades, and he had passed away in 1989 from natural causes. It wasn't anything traumatic. But he was one of those old-timers who his entire life was his job, and he said that as soon as that man passed away, that's when people started hearing voices and footsteps.
Interesting. So it was just because, that was his job and his passion, and he really just enjoyed that in life.
Yeah.
Well, that's always good to hear, you're haunting somewhere that you really enjoy. And I know, Enocha, you mentioned a little bit of how you're intuitive and sensitive. Are there any ways that you are able to kind of read energy, or how does it appear to you, or what do you feel?
For the most part, I just pick up on energy. You know how sometimes if you're walking somewhere, you can feel somebody standing behind you, even without turning around, someone's there?
Yeah.
That's how it feels for me most of the time. Sometimes I'll just be walking through and go, oh, someone's here. I just feel that. And if I have time, I will stop and try and tune in and figure out who that is. But Savannah is just a very busy place spiritually anyway. So I've only done it when I felt like it was really important. Because if I did it all the time, then I'd be stuck downtown even right now.
You'd go crazy, I'm sure. Do you have any tips for maybe someone who feels like they want to explore it a little more? Is this something that you've always felt you've had a connection to, and more recently you're just kind of diving into it? Or is it something that you've developed?
It's something that I was always interested in. It's something that I felt when I was younger, but kind of turned off for a number of reasons. And only just within the last few years have I started trying to tune back in. I've read a lot. I've consulted a lot of people who I trust. And then I've just tried to give myself space to explore the gift. And I really wish I could give some hard tips on this. These are the steps that you take to do this sort of thing. I am just kind of winging it. I'm just seeing what works and hoping it shakes out.
Right. And I think the most important thing is being open to it, which you are too.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Now, do you have any ways that you protect yourself, especially through your tours and everything? What do you use?
Yeah, I not to be, like that typical person, but I do have my crystal bracelets that I wear. I also have my evil eye necklace or bracelet that I'll wear with me. And sometimes if the activity downtown is especially busy, which happens sometimes, I have a Ghost F Off spray.
No way.
Is a mix of, some different essential oils that are supposed to help protect and combat negativity that I'll spray on myself, kind of like bug spray.
So cool. And when it comes to different forms of divination, do you think, because I know when it comes to like Ouija boards or just different things like that, a lot of people are skeptical. How do you feel in terms of like divination, Ouija boards?
I have never used a Ouija board. I think there's a lot of stigma to it, and I think it's one of those things that you give it power. Like, sure, it can be negative, but I think it can also be positive if that's how you're using it. That's a good question. I've never been asked that one. I have some pendulum boards that I've used on occasion. I have a spirit box app. I don't have an actual spirit box, but I have one of those apps that I use sometimes. That one, I kind of use that with like a grain of salt as to how reliable that one is. And sometimes if I'm able to, I will just sit and open myself up and kind of see if anybody wants to communicate.
And just tune in. And like you said, a lot of it has to do with respect and just intention too.
Yeah.
If you have mutual respect. And I think even with like the apps, like the app that you use, like the ghost apps or even just different voice recording apps, would you say that those are, like, I guess, accurate to some extent?
I feel like those are a little hit and miss because I don't know. I'm still trying to figure all of this out. And I feel like spirit boxes, like the actual spirit boxes, since they go through radio stations and scan through that, I feel, and this is just me, this is my opinion, everyone is entitled to their own, I feel like that seems a little bit more reliable as opposed to an app, which is generally just a word generator. And as a computer, essentially, sometimes those can get stuck in a loop and just spit stuff out.
Right. So how long have you been in Savannah now?
I've been in Savannah for a little more than 10 years. I moved here in 2010, moved away for about a year and a half, and then I moved back, and Savannah hasn't been able to get rid of me since then.
Nice. It's such a beautiful city. I've been there a few times, and every time I go, it's just such a awesome experience. So what has kept you there this long, and why do you think Savannah is so spooky?
The city itself is just a magical place. I don't know if it's necessarily like a portal or anything, but the city has an amazing history. And you feel it when you're walking around Savannah. I always joke that it feels like you could turn a corner and suddenly you transported back to 1739 or something.
Yeah, it's true. And if you want to talk just a little bit about like the history or I guess how it was founded, because there's so much that I wasn't aware of before I went on your tour, just of how it kind of came to be and all of the just the tragedy and how old it really is. You could just touch like a few points.
Yeah. So Savannah was founded in 1733. At least the colonized version of the city was founded then. The area itself has been home to indigenous people for thousands of years prior to that. And even when the English showed up to colonize it, the Yamacraw were living here. They are still around. They're part of the Muskogee Creek Nation. And the relationship between the Yamacraw and the English, specifically General Oglethorpe, who was the founder of the colony, was actually a really good relationship. Honestly, that kind of relationship should have been goals for the other colonies. But after he left and after the original leader of the Yamacraw, who had been here when they showed up, passed away, the relationship went downhill and they got pushed out due to westward expansion. But Savannah has been around as a colonized city since 1733 and has gone through the American Revolution. One of the bloodiest Revolutionary War battles was fought here, called the Siege of Savannah. The Americans and the French lost between 1,000 and 1,200 men in 4 weeks during that battle, which is a massive loss of life, even by today's standards. And I believe that is part of why the city is so haunted, is because of that really significant mass casualty incident. But, we've also had a lot of fires that have swept through the city, which is typical of these older cities. Everything's made out of wood. Your light source is fire. Buildings are close together. Stuff's going to catch on fire. So we've had several great fires. We've, of course, had deadly yellow fever epidemics, which is also very typical for a coastal city. And We've had the Civil War here, which thankfully was not fought in Savannah proper, but did leave behind a lot of chaos due to economic reasons.
Right.
And we had an earthquake. At least we got the outer rim of the earthquake. Charleston was actually the epicenter of an earthquake in the 1880s, and because of our close proximity to Charleston, we got hit with it too.
Wow, which is something typical. You wouldn't normally think of an earthquake in like the southeastern United States.
The whole East Coast is on a fault line. We just don't get the same tectonic shifts that y'all get on the West Coast.
Wow.
So it doesn't act up as often. But we do get hurricanes. We've had plenty of those.
Yeah. So really, it's been met with pretty much everything that you can think of.
Yeah.
In Savannah, like a lot of other cities in the South, whether it's like Low Country or New Orleans or just different areas like that, I feel like a large part of it has to do with like the water too, right? Would you say that holds a lot of energy?
Absolutely. Savannah is almost completely surrounded by water. And some people believe that is part of why the city is so haunted, that water is holding energy here.
Interesting. And something else that I just learned in July when I was down there was the haint blue on the porches. Now, is that something that a lot of the South has, or is it just particularly like New Orleans or Savannah?
No, you'll see that across the South. That is actually a West African tradition that was brought over during the transatlantic slave trade. Haint blue is this very pale blue. It almost looks like the sky. And the belief is that evil cannot cross over that color. And it was something that West Africans were able to hold on to, a piece of their culture they were able to hold on to throughout hundreds of years of oppression during the times of slavery. And because of how prevalent it became, everybody kind of does it now. Not everybody knows the historic context to it, but a lot of people do it. You'll see porches across the South painted haint blue.
Yeah, it's so pretty too. I like want to just have, a porch so I can just paint it. Do you have anything haint blue?
I do not. I probably should paint my porch ceiling haint blue because I do have one.
Oh, so cool. Yeah. Are there any other, I guess, correlations between the South and the swampland, or anything that you've picked up on that is like common with the paranormal?
Well, something that I think is interesting that I don't hear a lot of people talk about when I'm out doing my TikTok lives and things, a lot of people who will drop into the live will ask me, oh, is this Charleston? Oh, is this New Orleans? And then I have to explain, no, it's Savannah. And they always say the same thing. Oh, I looked at the architecture and it reminded me of Charleston and New Orleans. And I'm like, yeah, like we all have some similarities due to all three of us being port cities. And something that's also really interesting about all three cities is the use of ironwork in a lot of the buildings, especially the exterior of the buildings around windows and doors, because a lot of cultures have a belief that iron can dispel spirits, but it can also trap them. So when people are talking about how active the hauntings are in Charleston or New Orleans or Savannah, I always wonder how much of it is also due to the ironwork in our buildings.
The iron, yeah, I've never heard of iron as being a conductor of energy, but it totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. And overall, how would you say the people of Savannah embrace the paranormal and the culture of it being haunted? Because I know a lot of other places, certain cities will more so shy away, business owners, things like that. What about the people in Savannah?
People in Savannah love to talk about their ghosts. I think Savannah's reputation as one of the most haunted cities in the country, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that we love to talk about them. I briefly worked at an art studio off of City Market. I was helping one of my friends. It was his studio, and every once in a while I would fill in if he had to go out and do work because he was a photographer. And one night I was closing up the studio and I bumped a display and I scattered postcards all over the floor. And I was kind of running late, so I said to myself, I'm going to be opening up the next day. It's fine. I'll just leave those. I'll clean them up when I come back first thing in the morning. So the next morning, I come in to open up, got there a little early so I could start cleaning up the display that I knocked over. And as I was cleaning it up, all the other gallery owners were walking past, and they would poke their heads in and ask me, "Oh, did the ghost do that?" And the first time it happened, I thought, "Oh, we have a ghost here?" I mean, I guess it makes sense. This is an old building. But no, this was me. I bumped this. I knocked this over. And all of them said the same thing. "Oh, we thought the ghost did it. We all walked past last night and saw all the postcards scattered, and we were like, oh, the ghost did that."
Well, that's funny because at first someone could think it, that they were maybe being sarcastic, but the more that people talk about it and embrace it, the more other people feel comfortable sharing their stories and their own experiences with it.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of normalize it.
Oh, yeah.
So, Enocha, if you want to share a little bit about how did you begin your tours and when did you decide to start your TikTok account?
So I didn't plan any of this. This was all accident or destiny. I don't know what you want to call it. I was leaving my job at the station in spring of 2020. I was leaving to go to another job. Right as the pandemic hit, shuts everything down. The job that I was leaving to go to magically disappeared because of the pandemic. And I was stuck at home, bored out of my skull, trying to figure out what my next step is because I didn't want to go back into news, but I didn't know what to do now. And around July of that year, everybody just decided that time is meaningless. We are all skipping ahead to Halloween. So people started sharing ghost stories about where they live. And I thought, well, you know what? I live in Savannah. It's one of the most haunted cities in the country. Let me share some stories. So I made a few videos here and there talking about some of the haunted locations around Savannah. That kind of blew up. I got enough followers to be able to go live. And since everyone was still stuck at home and bored, I would go live at night because there was no one out on the streets. And so I could wander around downtown by myself or with my dog and share stories about Savannah's history and ghosts and architecture. And that resonated with a lot of people. By the time things started opening up, people started asking for in-person tours. And I decided that was probably my cue to start my own ghost and history tour company. So I officially opened that in October of 2021.
So cool. And I loved your tour. I learned so much. And I think it's really unique that you take guests on private tours, which I think is something that's like really special too.
Thanks. I have a lot of social anxiety, so dealing with large crowds of strangers is terrifying to me. And I know it's terrifying for a lot of other people too. So I feel like the aspect of having a private tour, it's more of a personable experience for everybody. And I feel like everybody gets a little bit more out of it.
Yeah, I think so too. And even me, I'm probably the annoying one on tours that no one else wants on their tour because I have so many questions. So I feel like, I feel more comfortable asking and it's more of a conversation too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to share some of the highlights of your tour or just a couple favorite spots maybe along the way.
Sure. I love going by the Kehoe House, which is an inn in downtown Savannah off of Columbia Square. The building itself is gorgeous, and I love talking about the history of it. And I also like talking about the ghosts there. The home is haunted by some ghost children. And I like debunking, to a degree, some of the other stories you hear on some of the other tours about the ghost children being the ghosts of the Kehoe twins who died in a deadly game of hide and go seek, because that's not true. But it could be some of the Kehoe kids who had really fond memories of that place and want to haunt it. Normally, when you hear about a place being haunted, it's usually some strange shadow figure looming over you in the middle of the night. But the Kehoe house just has ghost kids that like to play in the hallway, which is kind of refreshing.
And did you debunk any of the stories that people were saying?
Yeah, Savannah is a city that loves its legends, and I love a good campfire story as much as the next person. But there is a sense of responsibility that you have to have when you're sharing some of these stories, because you have to remember a lot of them were about actual people. There are a few legends in Savannah that are complete and utter fiction that have no historic basis to them at all. But, when you're talking about the Kehoe kids or, Alice Riley, who supposedly haunts Wright Square, and her story, you have to remember that they were people. They were real people who had real families. And you also never know who's going to be on your tour, because sometimes you might have somebody who's related to them on your tour.
Right.
So it's a good idea to be respectful and to be accurate.
That's good. And you're paying respect and sharing their story, and really trying to get to the truth of it. And it's keeping, it's keeping their memory and it's keeping them alive as well.
Yeah. My background is in journalism, and you're supposed to tell the facts and just the facts. And as a ghost tour guide, yes, there is an aspect of storytelling to it. So, it's all about timing and creating a sense of, being there in the moment. And, you want people to get chills and, to be a little scared, because it's a ghost tour. That's why you go on those. But at the same time, you don't have to just make up stuff. There's plenty of truth in Savannah stories that are terrifying enough.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I really respect, and I love the tours that will be truthful, because I think the truth a lot of times is scary enough, right? We don't have to like over dramatize or make believe to some extent. So I really love the tours like yours that just pride themselves on being truthful and kind of debunking the other myths out there.
Yeah. And, that's not to throw shade at any of the other tours around Savannah, because, everybody's got their niche. I just bill mine as being historically grounded.
Yeah. And I think the history is a whole nother aspect of, of learning and part of the experience as well that you share too. Are there any other highlights, or I guess the most known haunted places in Savannah?
There are so many, and I'm trying to just pick one.
I have a list that we could go through in a couple minutes, and I'll have you comment maybe just a few things you want to share on each. But I just didn't know if there were any other like sites that people come to Savannah and they're like, I want to see this place. Like, I guess the most notable.
I mean, there's so many. I joke that when people ask me, what's the most haunted home in Savannah, what's the most haunted building in Savannah, I'm like, it changes. Everybody's got their theories, and it seems to change from year to year.
Yeah, and it is interesting too, because if someone shares a video on TikTok or sees it on a tour, then that could kind of start an infatuation with that specific place. So I could see the popularity kind of rising and falling with different locations too. Okay, so we'll go through my list, and if you want to share something, or if you have any stories pertaining to this place or any personal experiences, because I've researched a few different places. So the Hamilton Turner Inn.
Yes. So I am still researching the history of that place. I can tell you that one of the original owners was on the electric board, and that home was the first home in Savannah to be rewired for electricity. Now, there are all sorts of legends about that place and about why it's haunted, and I'm still going through all of that. But I did have a follower on TikTok who contacted me and said, oh, I had an experience there. She said that she and her spouse were staying there, and it was the off-season. It was really quiet. They think they're going to have a really nice night. And then she wakes up at about 3 a.m. because the people in the room next to her were having this loud party. And she didn't want to go over and bother them and knock on the door or anything like that. So she just kind of rolled over and went back to sleep. The next morning when she was talking to the front desk clerk, she mentioned the party in the room next to her. And the front desk clerk said, there's no one staying next to you right now. There's no one staying anywhere near you.
No way.
So she woke up to a ghost party going on going on in the room next to her.
Interesting. I guess it's better to find out afterwards when you're like,
Yeah.
wait a second. Okay, so what about the Marshall House?
The Marshall House is a very old hotel. We had a few hotels that I think would rival that for age, but they're just not hotels anymore. That was opened up by a woman named Mary Marshall, who, was a very well-connected businesswoman in Savannah. The building itself was used as an overflow hospital for a few different reasons. We would have, like yellow fever epidemics and stuff in Savannah, but it was used as an overflow hospital, especially during the Civil War. When Savannah surrendered to the Union, it was used for wounded Union soldiers. Allegedly, I have not been able to find any hard evidence of this, but allegedly they found bones in the basement when they were working on fixing it back up again in the 1990s. That could have happened. It's certainly within the realm of possibility. I just haven't been able to track down any primary sources that say that definitely happened. But a lot of people believe that the bones allegedly found in the basement were amputated limbs from some of those soldiers. And some people have claimed to see a soldier wandering around the hospital with an arm missing, asking people if they have seen his arm. Now, I have not had that experience. No one I know has had that experience. I was walking down the hallway. My mom was staying there during one of her visits to Savannah, and so I was walking to her hotel room. And as I was walking down the hallway, I kept feeling somebody behind me, and I kept turning around, and there was no one there. But the entire time I was in that hallway, I felt like I was being watched. And I talked to a woman husband and wife rather, on one of my tours, who said that they stayed there on another trip with one of their friends. And they were sitting in the room talking. They had the TV on, but the volume was all the way down. And as they were talking, they heard a little girl say, "Mommy?" And they all stopped and looked at each other, like, "You heard that too, right?" And her husband said, "That's the TV. That's got to be the TV." And she said, "No, it's not. The volume's all the way down." She even picked up the remote and showed him the volume was all the way down.
Oh, wow.
And I've heard that similar story from other people as well. Other people have told me, "Oh, yeah, we heard a little girl talking in our room or in the hallway."
Oh, crazy. Yeah, especially when you add in like a place with a hospital and like a lot of that kind of medical stuff, I could see how the history can just kind of, the energy can layer.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. What about the 1790?
The 1790 is another one of those places that has a lot of legends about it. The most famous ghost is a ghost named Anna. And there are a lot of different legends about who she is and why she haunts that place. And from my research, it appears that all of those are completely made up. But Anna herself is a real spirit. A lot of people have had encounters with her on the third floor. In fact, Miley Cyrus famously had an encounter with her. She was in town filming the movie The Last Song, and she said that she came home from filming, back to her room from filming, and her boots had been moved, and there was a strange handprint on one of them. And she believed that was Anna trying to take off with her boots, and she didn't get too far because I guess boots are a little too heavy for Anna to move. But one of my friends had her own encounter with Anna. She was staying there with her husband. It was their honeymoon. They both lived in town, and they were like, "Oh, we'll just get a room here at the 1790. That'll be our nice little honeymoon just for us." And that night she took off a necklace that she had been wearing all day, put it in her bag. The next morning when they were packing up to go, she went to go get the necklace, and it wasn't in the bag. She goes through all of her bags. She goes to the hotel room, cannot find it. So she thinks she'll go down to the front desk, have them make a note of it, so if anybody finds it, they can call her and she'll come back and get it. So she's walking down the hallway. A housekeeper sees her, can see that my friend's a little upset. So she asks if she can help, and my friend explains that she's missing her necklace. It's just gone. And the housekeeper said, oh, don't worry. That's just Anna. It'll show up. And she thinks, okay, strange lady, I still have to tell the front desk. So she goes down and she tells them, they say the same thing. Don't worry, it's Anna, it'll show up. So she says, all right. She goes back and she and her husband pack up the car. They head home. They pull into the driveway of their house, and her necklace was sitting in the driveway.
No way. That's crazy.
She still has that necklace, and she told me that every time she sees it, she thinks of Anna.
Wow. Those ghost stories like really impress me are the ones with items randomly disappearing and reappearing.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like out of thin air, too.
Yeah.
So crazy.
And honestly, kind of impressive for Anna to get that far, because my friend lived in Midtown. So that's a good little distance from the 1790.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of work. Really impressive. What about the Pirate's House?
The Pirate's House, again, is a place that has a lot of different legends about it. It's one of the oldest buildings in Savannah. It's a building that's been added onto over time, and the original structure was a gardener's cottage for the trustees' garden when Savannah was still a colony. And over time, it's been added onto. It was a tavern for a while. Most of the pirates that came through there were French privateers, not nearly as sexy as the pirates that you generally think of. So technically, yes, they did have pirates. It's just not like Blackbeard or anything. But a lot of people have had experiences there, and they're not always the experiences you anticipate. Again, when you're going to a place called the Pirate House, you're expecting to see maybe like some pirate ghosts, right? I had a woman who reached out to me. She said that she was eating there, and she saw the spirit of a woman, but this woman was wearing a pink power suit. And she just walked through the dining hall, made eye contact with the person who was telling me the story, kind of nodded and smiled, and walked on.
Interesting. Yeah, not something that you would expect to see.
No.
Now, this next one, it's one of my favorites, and I think it's one of yours too, Bonaventure Cemetery.
Yes, I love Bonaventure Cemetery. So I volunteer for the Bonaventure Historical Society, and we are not allowed to talk about ghosts out there. There certainly could be some. I walk out there all the time, and the vibe out there is really peaceful. It is a wonderful place to walk. My dog loves it out there because there's lots of fun smells. And I love walking out there because the trees are gorgeous. In the spring, when the azaleas are blooming, the entire cemetery is bright pink, and it is so gorgeous. It's also right along the Wilmington River, so you get those nice breezes off the river. And it's really just a peaceful place to hang out. If you want to talk about a haunted cemetery, though, Colonial Park Cemetery, very haunted, totally different vibe. I have never felt a cemetery so busy in my entire life as I have with Colonial Park.
Have you had any experiences there?
Yes. So Colonial Park Cemetery was used from 1750 until 1853. By the time it closed, it was full, like completely full. And then there were a whole bunch of misadventures because the city wanted to build a courthouse there. That didn't really work out. And graves were disturbed and disrespected. They had a problem with grave robbing. And it was not until the 1960s that the city really started taking the upkeep of the cemetery seriously. So that's a little over 100 years after the cemetery closed to active burials. And over that time, the city, the cemetery was kind of forgotten and disrespected. And that's going to leave behind a lot of really restless spirits. I was walking past there one night on my way back to my car, and I felt somebody following me. And I thought, because of how late it was and how quiet it was out there, that I was about to get mugged. So I turn around real quick to yell at whoever's following me, thinking that'll freak them out long enough for me to run away. And there was no one there.
It
but
was
I
just
still sensed something.
that presence that you were talking about earlier that you just felt kind of
Mm-hmm.
someone over your shoulder.
Yeah, so one of my friends had warned me when I started my ghost story company. She was like, girl, you were going to a lot of haunted places. Ghosts are going to get familiar with you. Some might try to get too familiar. If that happens, set your boundaries. Let them know that they can't follow you, that they have to stay there. And so that's what I had to do. And that was the first time I ever had to do that. I've done it several times since then. The first time's always the scariest, though.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Have you ever felt like someone could have kind of attached to you or followed you home, or you were able to kind of stop it before it happened?
Yeah, another time I was headed home from a totally different cemetery. I won't say which one, just for privacy reasons. But as I was driving home, I feel this wave of grief come over me. And I'm a very emotional person. I know what my emotions feel like, and that wasn't me. So I actually had to pull off to the side of the road, and I said, look, I appreciate you sharing your feelings with me. I respect that, but you cannot follow me home. You have to go back to the cemetery. And it just felt like this pressure came off my shoulders and left. And I was like, all right, that's great.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's good that you kind of established the boundaries, so no one followed you home. And then
Yeah.
the last highlight I wanted to talk a little bit about is River Street, which I remember on your tour you mentioned that that is one of like the most haunted places just because it's the oldest. If you want to talk a little bit about River Street and if you've had any experiences or know of any, I guess, stories involved with River
Yeah,
Street.
absolutely. Give me just 1 second. My cat is going nuts
Oh
right
yeah,
outside.
you're good.
Meow. You can stay in here. You have to be quiet. Oh my God. So River Street is the oldest area of Savannah. Even looking back at prior to the English showing up, the area was used by the Yamacraw and by other indigenous people in the area. Since then, that's become our port. It was a port for a long time, and now it's kind of our touristy hub. That is a lot of time with a lot of different people and a lot of different energy. Some of it's good, some of it is not good. Because being a port city in the South, yes, that port would have been used during the transatlantic slave trade. So you would have seen a lot of really positive stuff happening down there and some really negative stuff as well. One time I was walking down there with my dog, Vash, and he does this little crouch and wiggle when he sees another dog he wants to play with.
Uh-huh.
And we were down there. It was at night. There was no one else around. And out of the blue, he starts doing that.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Another time, we were down on River Street and we were walking closer to City Hall. And my dog is walking in front of me because he likes to be the pack leader. Then he stops and looks behind us, turns around and tries to walk back in the direction we were coming from. My dog does not do that. He is a very forward-moving dog. And I don't know what he saw back there, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was like, no, we're going to keep moving forward.
I'm just going to ask a few last-minute questions. What is the number one place that you're dying to visit or investigate?
There are a few mental health hospitals that I would like to investigate because as a neurodivergent girly, I would like to investigate them with a sense of respect because, of course, a lot of people go in there for the novelty of it, but I would like to go in there with the idea of helping people either gain clarity or move on, or at least leave that building if they want to. We have a few of those around Georgia, and I'm from the Florida Panhandle originally, where there's Chattahoochee and the Florida State Hospital there. That is still an active hospital, so I don't think I'll ever be able to investigate that one, but there are a few closed ones that I would love to investigate.
Nice. Okay. And then, what is your scariest experience?
The scariest experience, I think, would be that one spirit trying to follow me home from Colonial Park Cemetery. Just because it was late at night, there was no one else around, and I was just trying to walk back to my car. I wasn't prepared for anything to happen.
Right. It caught you off guard there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Enocha, thank you so much for coming on my podcast and chatting with me and sharing all of your stories and your information. How can some of my listeners follow you, book a tour, if you want to share some of your social media, your website?
Sure. First, thank you for having me on. And my website is EnochaEdenfieldTours.com. They can also follow me on TikTok. My handle is Saltwaves Spanish Moss. I'm also on Instagram as Eni, E-E-N-I-E, Edenfield. And I'm also on Patreon as Enocha Edenfield.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Enocha.
Thank you.